Friday the 13th is a cultural phenomenon and has been for almost decades, with several movies spanning many generations and a footprint that will forever haunt Spirit Halloween. Don't come at me for saying this, but I've never found Friday the 13th to be the best out of the main slasher franchises. If I were looking at all of them as a whole, I've seen every Friday the 13th movie and they've all started to blend themselves together in my head because they're just kind of forgettable. Jason Lives is probably my favorite because it is kind of like the satiric take.
Why'd I have to go and dig up Jason? Some folks have a strange idea of entertainment.
And also gives us a really well done fight scene between Jason and Tommy Jarvis and some really cool iconic cinematography. But even though the movies haven't been the best, there is still something so charming and lovable about these films. They have a classic nostalgic feel combined with some hilarious kills that makes them really entertaining. I can already hear people screaming at me about this in the comments, but I'm sorry, Michael's the GOAT, then it's Leatherface, and then it's Freddy in my eyes. But I've vlogged so many hours into the Friday the 13th video game, I have posters hung in my office. I'm a fan. Trust me. I just think the Friday the 13th franchise could really use a reboot. If any property could be done without ruining the classics, it's Friday. Well, because if you ask anybody on the street what they remember from a Friday movie or what Friday movie they've seen, they probably wouldn't even be able to tell you. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is universally loved and it's a classic everyone has seen. Halloween, same thing. The first Friday, people get confused of why this old woman is there instead of Jason. My point is, the franchise is and always was in shambles, kind of being passed along to whatever director wanted to make it, and most of the time they got to do whatever they wanted, leading to no cohesive story at all. Like one director loved Evil Dead and he basically wrote the Necronomicon into Friday the 13th canon. Very cool, but very random. Sam Raimi let them use the actual book prop from the Evil Dead movies in Jason Goes to Hell. Very random and weird, but maybe they could have been the early sparks of that Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash movie they were intending on making. That would be good for actually another video. Long story short, I think rebooting the Friday the 13th franchise and giving it a cohesive story, maybe doing the lame legacy sequel thing and saying the first 4 movies actually happened and everything else didn't, I don't know, I'm just spitballing here. But oh wait, no, we could never actually get that because the Friday the 13th franchise has been in legal hell for over a decade now. So today, I would like to talk about the future and the past of the Friday the 13th franchise in a kind of quick Spark Notes kind of way. I definitely do in the future want to go back through every Friday the 13th movie and talk about the production and how they were kind of shady, a lot of them. A lot of these movies were shot in really shady and cheap ways. So very quickly, let's rewind the tape all the way back to the fabulous year of 1979. The snowboard was being invented, Pink Floyd's The Wall was about to come out, and a guy by the name of Sean S. Cunningham, now horror legend, at the time, was looking to copy one of the best and newest horror movies of all time. Halloween, a film that is tied to a holiday, and what do you do if you're ripping off a film tied to a holiday? Choose a different one and have it do nothing really with the plot of the movie. Oops, kids got murdered by a grieving mother. Looks like another curious case of that Friday the 13th bad luck. To be fair, the original title was going to be A Long Night at Camp Blood, which I find a little bit more fitting, but I see why it wasn't used. It's laughable, but Sean had a lot of faith in this project being a success, so much so that he put an ad in Variety magazine, mostly because he was scared of someone stealing the rights, and he did it before the writer Victor Miller could even finish the script. This actually managed to generate some interest in the film and managed to get them a budget of around $550,000, and the filmmakers took the summer to make their Halloween ripoff, but he wanted it to be, quote, more of a roller coaster ride, and they kind of relied more on gore and shock value to drive as many audiences in as possible. The film was shot around Hardwick and Bardstown and Hope in Warren County, New Jersey in September 1979. The campsites were shot on a working Boy Scout camp, Camp No-Be Busco, which is located in Hardwick. The camp is still standing and operates as a summer camp today, and from everything I've seen, production was actually surprisingly chill. Besides Betsy Palmer smacking the shit out of Adrian King, all seemed to work out fine. And once filming was done, hype around the film grew in the industry and started a kind of a bidding war over this film. Again, after Halloween, studios were starving for something like that. They ended up settling on Paramount Pictures for $1.5 million in distribution rights after executive Frank Mancuso Sr. said, quote, "The minute I saw Friday the 13th, I knew we had a hit. The international distribution rights would then end up going to Warner Brothers, and of course, you guys know the rest. It was a huge hit. This movie was really the start of the slasher heyday of the 80s. If Halloween started the match, Friday the 13th lit the whole place on fire. Of course, there would be a sequel and then some. The franchise for the rest of the 80s would then get 8 sequels, all directed and written by different people. After the huge success of the first film, Paramount scrambled to make as many sequels as humanly possible. According to Paramount Pictures chairman and CEO Frank Mancuso Sr., our friend, we wanted it to be an event where teenagers would flock to the theaters on that Friday night to see the latest episode. Originally, they wanted to do the Halloween route and try to create an anthology series where every movie would be a different scary movie entirely, but it wasn't until Paul Scurdy? I'm so sorry, I'm so bad at pronouncing names. A co-owner of Esquire Theaters with Steve Manasian and Bob Barsaman, and producer of the original film, swore by continuing the story of Jason and Pamela Voorhees, something Sean S. Cunningham was against, and Jason at the end was kind of meant to be more of a jokey stinger type of moment. Steve Miner, however, thought it was a great idea and ended up taking the director's role for the next 2 movies after Sean S. Cunningham didn't really want to direct. It's clear that when making these sequels, the studio actually gave 0 fucks about trying to produce a cohesive storyline or make these movies different. In fact, the studio basically told directors to make the same thing because it worked and try to find a tweak or two to make it somewhat new or interesting. It actually wasn't until the 3rd movie that we were introduced to Jason's famous hockey mask, and it was shot in 3D when that was a fad to try to entice those teenagers with way too much lunch money to try to sneak a peek at the new bloodbath Jason was cooking up. After the 3rd movie, Mancuso Sr. was not so confident that they could continue making Jason movies for like the 4th or 5th time, so they decided to make the main draw of the movie the fact that it was the final chapter and Jason would finally meet his doom. This movie introduced a character that would become much more interesting later, which is Tommy Jarvis, who is a 12-year-old who put Jason down for good. Actually, it was about like 2 years because Frankie Boy knew that he had a cash cow just burning a hole in his pocket. And considering the fact that the last 2 box office grosses showed no signs of declining, Frank said quite simply the public still wanted to see these films, so until they stop coming, why not make more? So of course they just started making a 5th Friday the 13th movie, this one being about a now older Tommy Jarvis who deals with the PTSD and hallucinations of Jason. And of course, murder starts happening around him and he assumes Jason's a part of it, but really it's just a copycat who just really happens to dress exactly like Jason so that the studio can market that he's back somewhat. Also, I can't believe that I haven't talked about this yet, but Friday the 13th is probably got to be one of the horniest slasher franchises of all time. The directors in the studio really knew who they were marketing to, which was teenage boys, and half of these read as softcore porn with a little horror movie in it. A New Beginning has to be one of the most horny out of all of these movies. Women are basically portrayed as non-stop sex machines that can barely keep their clothes on. This one really loves to take its fucking time with the softcore porn, and this all makes sense because director Danny Steinman actually directed hardcore porn for his first ever film under the alias of Danny Stone, which that's funny as hell. Not shaming porn directors, but this movie feels like a shitty porn with too much plot. The plot really takes a backseat. While there's some cool story aspects with Tommy, ultimately this movie fucking sucks. Of course, there was a success to this. Of course, it was just printing money, so they made another one, and they decided, let's bring back Jason for real this time. So they made Jason Lives, the movie to bring Jason back, and the one that makes Tommy Jarvis the most badass character in the franchise. This is probably my favorite Friday movie. It has a fantastic opening sequence with one of the most iconic shots of the franchise's long history of really dull, grainy, and kind of low budget looking shots. It's fast paced. It doesn't take too much time to get stuff growing. The atmosphere, the sense of dread is there, and not to mention, it's kind of a meta commentary and satire of the Friday movies in general. This movie is a magnum opus of the franchise. If I'm trying to show someone Friday the 13th, I usually turn on this movie because it's just so much fun. The final showdown with Tommy is awesome, and this movie did so well, of course, like the 6 other times they made a Friday the 13th movie. This time, they decided to make the next one focus on a Carrie-like telekinetic girl having a large and grand battle with Jason. This one was not great, but some of the fight scenes are really cool. This would be the first movie to introduce Kane Hodder, who would continue to play Jason for the rest of the franchise, and being crowned probably the one true Jason for fans of the series. But there was a stunt in this movie where he did almost get completely fucked up, where breakaway stairs, he didn't fall in the correct place and they didn't break properly enough. He almost just completely bashed his head on some real stairs. So I'm very glad that he didn't do that. But yeah, so Kane Hodder's here now. Jason is officially got his body. After this, the franchise started to die down a little bit more, and they started to do a little bit worse. It wasn't like they were losing money or anything. The return on investment was insane for how small the budgets were, but the fatigue of Jason was starting to rear its ugly head and come to fruition with Jason Takes Manhattan, a film that could have been called Jason Takes the Boat, because 80% of this movie is spent with Jason on a boat just killing people on his way to New York City. The New York segments, especially the Times Square segment, was incredibly hard for the studio to do, and they opted to shoot most of the film in Vancouver, and most of the film isn't even shot in New York at all. I'm telling you guys, this movie is boring, and because of that and other issues, this movie didn't actually do that well in the box office. It was the most unsuccessful movie in the box office for the Friday the 13th franchise for like the first time. When it failed, Sean S. Cunningham became interested in reacquiring the franchise back. He wanted to make a Freddy vs. Jason movie with New Line Cinema, who owned the Nightmare on Elm Street IP. But at the time, both studios were really wanting each other's spooky slasher man, and negotiations never went through. It was until Jason Takes Manhattan that the rights reverted to Skirty, Mimancian, the guys I was mispronouncing earlier, and Barcimanto, who sold them to New Line before Cunningham could start working on Freddy vs. Jason. At the time, Wes was working on a new Nightmare, so pre-production on Freddy vs. Jason had to be put on hold. Now that rumblings of Freddy vs. Jason were out there, the studio wanted to build up hype back around Jason Voorhees. All these deals took years, and Jason was out of the spotlight, so they allowed Cunningham to produce and co-write the next installment of the Friday the 13th franchise, Jason Goes to Hell, a very interesting movie that brings the Evil Dead into Friday the 13th canon with the Necronomicon. Features a dead Jason Voorhees who possesses people after he dies, and adds a lot of supernatural canon retconning aspects to the franchise. The movie was directed by a childhood friend of Cunningham's son, a guy who was very passionate about cinema, and at the time recently graduated from NYU and never directed a feature before. Again, this was Cunningham coming back after decades away. He definitely didn't leave an impressive mark with this one. Jason, again, is not the killer in a Friday movie, and it definitely suffers for it. The movie has a great practical makeup effect and keeps you entertained while you try to piece together the confusing canon of Friday the 13th. It was somewhat successful in the box office and ended up foreshadowing Freddy and Jason's fight at the end, with Freddy pulling Jason's hockey mask into hell with him. Cunningham at this point just wanted to make Freddy vs. Jason and was tired of having to jump through New Line's hoops to get it made. But of course, development was delayed again, and he was forced to produce probably the worst film of the franchise, Jason X, which I feel like I don't even need to go into depths to explain why this movie's bad. It's a low-budget early 2000s sci-fi movie where Jason is frozen in time and brought back into space, where he kills the crew of a spaceship like a xenomorph who went to Gold's Gym. The movie was probably the highest budget of any of the previous films and was probably one of the worst. It was true to the franchise's roots, but you know, the obvious ripoffs were pretty clear. It was definitely ripping off Aliens. The writer even admitted that he ripped off Aliens when he said that,
what if we do Alien? Because Alien is dark and dirty, and you could shoot that anywhere, and you can, you know, pass it off as ship. And so that was the plan. And I actually stole Alien and Alien Structure to structure the movie. And I have no regrets stealing from Jimmy Cameron, because he got enough money. He did that Avatar thing.
this movie did not live up to expectations in the box office and is genuinely seen as one of the worst horror movies ever made. The film was so bad that the studio didn't even trust it and shelved it for 2 years before releasing it, but finally, after Cunningham so patiently made 2 very shitty movies, he finally got the go-ahead to produce Freddy vs. Jason, a movie that took 15 years in development and over $6 million and 18 unused scripts, which featured plots like Freddy originally drowning and molesting Jason as a child, to a plot centering around Freddy worshippers known as Fredhead. But they definitely narrowed down the script and made a movie happen, and I gotta say, I have a lot of fun rewatching this one. It's a good time. You know, the best part is definitely the Freddy versus Jason fights, and the film together isn't completely amazing. I think the CGI Freddy smoking hookah worm thing was a little weird, but it is really a fun popcorn roller coaster ride. When Jason hits people in this movie, they fucking fly like an anime. It's really fun. It's super goofy. I enjoyed it till the last second, and audiences must have had too, because it quickly became the most successful movie with Jason ever in it. Soon the rights would shift again, with them going to Michael Bay's Platinum Dune Studios, who intended to reboot the franchise for modern audiences. Rights at first were hard to acquire, but they basically got the full go-ahead to do whatever they wanted. The film kind of plays like a love letter to the franchise's best moments and kills, and it explains Jason's lore in a more straightforward way, and has some really fun scenes. This movie is painfully stuck in 2007, and I kind of have a hard time wanting to rewatch it. But if you're looking for a more modern Friday the 13th movie, this is the best and probably only one, besides Freddy vs. Jason, but that's a crossover. But overall, this movie actually did pretty good, and it brought new life into the franchise, so much so that they wanted to make a sequel, and it was pretty quickly after that Brad Fuller, producer, was already starting to work on the next film. This sequel was planned to release on August 13, 2010, but Warner Brothers pulled the movie from their release date schedule, and it was announced on Twitter by Fuller that the project was dead in the water and not happening. This is because in 2009, the movie industry was hurting bad. Studios were struggling to make money. They didn't want the risk of this high-budget horror movie and opted to take safer and easier films. It's absolutely insane to me that the franchise that was printing money is now deemed too risky by a studio, showing how gradual the fall and decline in quality and public interest really put the nail in the coffin. If they maybe made more good Friday movies than bad, there wouldn't be this problem. This is where the franchise gets spiraled into being passed around, and this sequel goes through even more development hell. Originally, they wanted it to be a found footage movie, probably due to the popularity of Paranormal Activity at the time, and they passed a script along to tons of writers, leading all the way up to 2017. An important thing to mention is that writers had a script done in 2011, New Line just didn't want to make it, and now they were struggling to get this film made. The film was going to be called Friday the 13th Part 13, and even more casting was made for someone to play young Jason. It was far along. Nobody really knew if this movie was gonna be made though, because of the purgatory the studio put it in. One second being interested and the next canceling releases and pulling the plug. It wasn't until February of 2017 that they finally canceled the project for good. On October 10th, Shannon and Swift revealed the title of their proposed sequel, Friday the 13th Camp Blood: The Death of Jason Voorhees. The rights would then return to New Line and Warner Brothers in 2018, and then Victor Miller, who wrote the original Friday the 13th screenplay, basically came back into the picture and was like, hey, where's my slice of the pie? This thing is dead now, and wanted to reclaim his rights to the screenplay and content contained in. So that was a big problem. And then original producer Sean S. Cunningham claims that, he did write the screenplay for Friday the 13th, and he was under a work for hire by another corporation. And under copyright law, the employer is then considered the author of the actual thing if you're hiring someone to write for you. So he kind of hired him as an employee. Miller wrote the screenplay as an employee, and he never had a copyright to the screenplay at all. So obviously when the lawsuit happened in a federal court, Miller actually ended up winning the rights against him, which you wouldn't suspect. Cunningham then appealed, and the appeal was withdrawn and then reinstated the following year. But then, it was all in limbo. It was kind of weird. Basically, Victor Miller ended up getting the rights to something that he actually created. Sean S. Cunningham was kind of more of like a Steve Jobs in this situation. In October of 2018, LeBron James and his production company Spring Hill Entertainment were in talks to co-produce a next film. A month later, screenwriter Clint Ford started writing a prequel screenplay for the franchise titled Friday the 13th: The Beginning. Then other writers started coming in. Tom McLaughlin decided to make a movie that was a sequel to Jason Lives and wrote it out, and it was called Jason Never Dies. That would actually be really cool, and it would ignore all the other films in the franchise and just take place after Jason Lives, which I think would be really, really, really fun. Then, flash forward to 2021, Victor Miller then won the domestic rights of that lawsuit of the Friday the 13th franchise. So at this point, you might think, damn, this franchise is like, fuck, dead in the water. Eventually, the lawsuit would then separate Jason from the Friday the 13th franchise, meaning that you can't even make a movie with Jason called Friday the 13th anymore. Obviously devastating for fans, and really shows how these original creators really didn't give a shit from the beginning, just wanted all the cash they could grab. I'm happy for Victor Miller though. It seems like he actually ended up getting the fair end of the bargain in this. I get that he needed it to be, he needed his money. He created this franchise. He deserved it. But ultimately, it does kind of complicate things. Luckily, on Halloween this year, we got the announcement that A24 was actually producing a series with Victor Miller and producer Brian Fuller, who created some of the great short-lived classic shows such as my personal favorite, Pushing Daisies and Hannibal. The show seems to be in fantastic hands, and I hope it captures that 1980s nostalgia and breathes some much needed life into this dying franchise. I actually have a lot of hope for this franchise now in the future, and if they could get any new life and new lore into anything, it's Friday. They never really thought of it anyway, and most people just know Jason as an undead zombie guy with a hockey mask and a machete. This could not only make the franchise more interesting, but also breathe more life into it and actually make people know what Friday the 13th is about. The Friday the 13th franchise has always been popcorn fun, and I've always had fun watching it. It definitely has its flaws, and if you asked me last year after the rights lawsuit what I thought about its history or its future, I would tell you it's dead. It's not coming back. But now I would say no. This new deal with A24 seems incredibly promising, and I'm very excited for the future. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I hope you guys like this longer video. Sorry for the delay on it. It did take me a little bit longer to make this. Obviously, it was also Thanksgiving last week, and there's a huge sickness going around, so I've just been kind of in and out of reality. So thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for supporting. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please discuss in the comments. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I will probably respond or read them. Thank you guys so much again, and please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you, and goodbye.
Yes.